Hello. I'm sort of killing time because I'm due to talk to someone online in about 10 minutes, so kind of killing time. This seems as good a topic as any, and I think very topical. Brexit, the B word. Um, it goes without saying it's been a very, very divisive subject, and in my view, it's been toxic for this country. That's my opinion. I think it's been toxic in terms of the divisions it's caused. I'm utterly fed up with it, and I hope there is some point where we start to move on. And if this general election kind of makes some clarity in the direction that we're going, that's a good thing. So I'm broadly welcoming the general election, broadly. I'm not looking forward to all the mudslinging that there will inevitably be. So prepared to hear claims of Corbyn the communist and Johnson the wicked Tory, and you get the drift. It's just going to be, there's going to be that rough and tumble that always comes with a general election. Fine. But I want to talk about something specifically regarding these divisions. It's interesting how the Brexit divisions have kind of now become the new left and right. Brexit divisions now seem to count more than the traditional Labour versus Tory thing, because both major parties are so divided in themselves. I suspect that Tory Remainers and Tory Leavers are in a more bitter war with each other than they are with Labour, and vice versa. And that's really unfortunate, and that's true of wider society. I find myself in agreement with a lot of positions on other areas like crime or political correctness or whatever it may be, with people I know are very pro-Brexit. But as soon as the Brexit issue comes up, it's just, I prefer not to get into it with people I'm friends with, because it is so toxic. Even though I don't consider myself a hardline Remainer, I'm not calling for another referendum, I'm not a lover of the EU. I don't like Brexit, and I'm not convinced it's a good thing. And I think, unfortunately, feelings are running so high that there is a puritanism about the Leave side, and there is on the Remain side, but it's this puritanism whereby if you're, if you don't believe in a no-deal Brexit, then you don't really believe in Brexit, and you must be a traitor. That's the sort of gutter conclusions that we're now coming to. I've had a lengthy kind of back and forth on a thread where the OP was about, the main message was about whether or not John Bercow was a traitor. We're normalising these sort of terms. I don't think he is. But anyway, my issue with the thread wasn't just about that. It's that the person disagreeing with the OP, this was an admin making the OP, by the way, someone who I respect, someone who usually comes out with intelligent conversation. It was just a meme, and someone replied saying he didn't think that Bercow was a traitor and it was inflammatory language. For that, he was accused of being a snowflake. So I took issue with that, because I'm thinking, well, does that make, are you saying that if anyone disagrees with you, they're automatically a snowflake? And that this comes into, it's partly why I made the video yesterday, because it's like, my understanding of the pejorative snowflake is someone who's being overly sensitive, not someone who's having a different point of view. So I find myself very reluctant to post anything about Brexit on my Facebook timeline, and I'm quite outspoken. I do put forward my views on a lot of issues, but I tend to avoid doing it with Brexit because my British friends I know at least half of them are pro-leave, and I just don't want a situation where I'm posting something and it's going to descend into the gutter. I'm not looking for an echo chamber, but what's the point of saying, oh well, it's good to have healthy constructive debate, if there isn't healthy constructive debate? It's just mudslinging. It gets very tiresome and draining. It really does. I don't think, I get it, Brexit is something people feel very strongly about, but I don't feel that I am a hardliner. So it frankly pisses me off a bit when people assume that I'm the other side. I don't consider myself a hardline Remainer at all. I'm not calling for another referendum, and I'm not a lover of the EU. I'm not going out of my way waving EU flags and above the UK flag, and I wouldn't, incidentally, but I can understand, for example, heated rows between a hardline Remainer and a hardline Leaver, but it's now getting to the point where those of us who are moderate, I'm not going to say neutral, but moderate. Okay, I'm not neutral, I'm not going to pretend I'm neutral. I think Brexit is a bad thing. I think Berko's right about that. I think it's probably the biggest problem that's hit this country since World War II. Time will tell. But that doesn't mean I'm telling Leavers they're idiots, or that I can't understand their point of view. I just don't see anything positive coming from this. And I would say to the people, can you honestly say that the last 3 years has been good for this country? Now they'll say, oh, it's because Remainers have kept putting up blocks. I'm not sure about that. I reckon even if we'd left, there'd still be some contention. They'd say, oh, but the EU's doing this, the EU's doing that. It's a Leave side that wanted this. It's a Leave side that wanted us to go through the process of getting out. This is what we have. And yeah, there may be some of this uncertainty may well be because Remainers are putting up blocks. So I'm not convinced that they're going about the right approach. But even if they weren't putting up blocks, this was never going to be a simple process. And I think it's pretty foolish to argue that it would be. Like, we could just come out with no sort of consideration of the consequences of trade negotiations, of anything like that. It was always going to be a complex process. Always. I think even with a no deal, that isn't going to simplify things, because then we'd have to renegotiate with every member state, by definition. If we just tear up all our trade negotiations with the EU, ostensibly we will have to start from scratch with all the member states, and maybe some of them will be enthusiastic to do that, but the EU might put up barriers. My point is, this was never ever going to be simple, and to attack Remain people for saying that, like, for the situation we're in today, seems pretty absurd. If the Remain side had won, and they didn't, but if they did, what would have happened? The result would be that we'd still be in the EU, the Leave side would be pretty pissed about it, and maybe they'd be trying to get another referendum. But I'm convinced, actually, I'm prepared to say that I'm convinced it wouldn't be as bitter and divisive as it is now if the referendum had won for Remain. And that's not being a sore loser, it's just saying that's what I feel the situation would be. Leave did win, they had the mandate, and that's why we're going through this process. And if the Conservatives get a majority, then I imagine that Johnson will probably go for some sort of no deal situation. Although he claims that's not what it wants, I'm not so sure about that. But I just find it highly unfortunate that this is such a divisive issue. I mean, I know people who are intelligent, reasonable people, and it's like they suddenly become It's like Brexit takes over their thinking to the point where they're not really thinking critically. It's just rants. It's just angry rants about the EU. It's so nauseating to see what's happening in this country. And I love the United Kingdom, but I am finding it very draining, disillusioning to see not just the division but the uncertainty that we're facing, which, like I say, is maybe why a general election's a good thing. Of course, if, let's say, the Lib Dems do very well and the Greens and the SNP, one big concern I do have about the general election, if the SNP do well, they'll of course push for another Scottish referendum, which is just not good for anyone who actually believes in this country. Because if they push for another Scottish referendum, and let's say that one goes for being pro-independence, then we're going to have a very complicated situation, because the SNP will probably try to make some sort of unilateral declaration of independence, which the British government, in my view, will rightly reject, because they won't agree to another referendum. Well, actually, Johnson said he isn't going to agree to that referendum, and the final say is with the British Prime Minister. So the SNP, if they become the main party in Scotland, might try to do it on their own, and then we could have a situation like Catalonia, which could even descend into violence. So I'd like to think that as we leave the 2010s, we get more stability. Unfortunately, I think Johnson may be right. If there isn't a clear mandate for any party, or if the Tories don't win, we'll probably see 2 more divisive referendums in 2020. But I don't support the Tories. I don't particularly want to see them as the largest party, because I disagree with a lot of their policies out, even outside Brexit. God help us. This situation is just I don't want to use profanities, but it's an effing travesty. It's like Watergate for the Americans. I remember when Gerald Ford said our long national nightmare is over. Well, in this country it's been dragging on for 3 years. The division, the uncertainty. As much as I really don't like the idea of a no-deal Brexit, I'd still prefer that in some ways than this continued division and uncertainty. Although I'm not convinced that even a no-deal Brexit will end the division and uncertainty. I do wish hardline leavers would get would be a little bit less dogmatic and a little bit more realistic, because I think they tend to have this idea that, we'll just leave with no deal and everything will be fine. To me, that is utterly naive and foolhardy. It's fine being patriotic, and it's fine saying you believe in the country, but belief alone isn't going to provide answers. And saying we done all this by ourselves before the EU negates the fact that when we joined the EU in the early 70s, it was a very different world. It was still the decolonisation period, so Britain today is in a totally different situation. So to just hark back to the pre-EU period, I think, is misguided. The only people I can see that think Brexit is a good idea is Leave campaigners, who are primarily politicians. There are a few others, there's Witherspoon CEO, and there are a few others, but I'm not even going to get into it. I was going to say all the experts who are worth their salt are saying that it's going to be a problem for this country, but of course that then gets into the thing, they're elitists, they don't know what they're talking about. Except I'm going to put their word over the word of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, who's, I'm convinced that for them it's just a vote winner. It's just pitching to the Eurosceptic base, and they'll say it's democracy. Well, democracy is the best form of government, but you know what? Sometimes people are wrong. People don't have all the facts. I don't believe I have all the facts on everything. I don't believe that I know everything. So why are the voters so convinced that they know everything? I'm going to leave it there.